How can a single document change everything you thought you controlled? When I opened the envelope and saw my husband's lawyer's name, I realized too late that my best friend's love, and my own selfishness, had cost me everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The notification sound from my phone pierced through the evening quiet like a knife. Jasper's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his dark eyes flicking to my device buzzing against the dining table. "That's the 5th time tonight," he said quietly, cutting another piece of his chicken. "Dorian again?" I snatched the phone before he could see the screen, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and guilt. Dorian's messages always had this effect on me, like a secret thrill I couldn't quite explain away. "It's just work stuff," I lied smoothly, sliding the phone into my lap. "You know how crazy things get at the office." Jasper set down his fork completely now, his 35-year-old face wearing that expression I'd grown to hate, patient disappointment mixed with growing suspicion. "Meliora, it's 9:30 at night, and it's Saturday." "So, some of us don't get to clock out at 5 like you IT guys," I snapped, immediately regretting my tone. But instead of apologizing, I doubled down. "Besides, since when do you monitor my phone calls?" Our 7-year-old daughter, Ella, looked up from her mashed potatoes, her innocent brown eyes darting between us with the kind of awareness that made my stomach clench. She was too young to understand the tension crackling between her parents, but old enough to sense that something was wrong. "I'm not monitoring anything," Jasper replied, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm just concerned about how much time you're spending talking to your ex-boyfriend." "He's my best friend," I corrected sharply. "Dorian has been in my life longer than you have, Jasper. We have history." "That's exactly what worries me." The phone buzzed again in my lap. This time, I couldn't resist glancing at it. Dorian's message made my pulse quicken. Thinking about our conversation earlier. "You deserve so much better than what you're getting at home." I felt heat creep up my neck. Dorian understood me in ways that Jasper never seemed to. When I complained about feeling unappreciated, Dorian listened. When I felt overwhelmed by domestic life, Dorian reminded me of the vibrant, interesting woman I used to be before marriage and motherhood dulled my edges. "You're doing it again," Jasper observed, his voice tired now instead of angry. "You're texting him right in front of me." "I'm not texting anyone," I protested, even as my thumbs moved across the screen. "You always know exactly what to say. Thank you for understanding me." Jasper stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Ella, sweetheart, why don't you go get ready for your bath? Mommy and Daddy need to talk." Our daughter nodded solemnly, carrying her plate to the kitchen with the careful precision of a child trying not to make waves. The sound of her footsteps fading down the hallway left Jasper and me alone with the weight of unspoken accusations. "This has to stop," he said quietly, beginning to clear the table. The late-night calls, the constant texting, bringing him up in every conversation. It's not appropriate for a married woman. I felt my face flush with indignation. "Excuse me? Not appropriate? Since when do you get to dictate who I can be friends with? Since your friend started telling you that you deserve better than your husband," Jasper replied, his calm demeanor cracking slightly. "Yes, I heard you on the phone with him yesterday. The walls aren't that thick, Meliora." My phone buzzed again. Then again. Dorian was persistent tonight, and each notification felt like validation that someone in this world actually wanted to talk to me. "You're being paranoid," I said, standing to face him across our small dining room. "Dorian cares about me. He listens when I need to vent about things. Things like your marriage. Things like feeling unheard and unappreciated." Jasper set down the plates he'd been holding and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something colder. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. "I've been patient," he said slowly. "I've tried to understand. But you're having an emotional affair, Meliora. Maybe you don't see it that way, but that's what this is. That's ridiculous, I shot back, even as part of me wondered if he might be right. Dorian and I are friends. We talk about everything. Work, life, dreams. You know, the kind of deep conversations that married couples are supposed to have, but apparently don't. The barb hit its mark. Jasper flinched slightly, and I felt a twisted satisfaction at having wounded him. It felt like power, like control over a situation that had been making me increasingly uncomfortable. I've tried to have those conversations with you, he said quietly, but every time I bring up something serious, you either change the subject or start texting Dorian. Maybe because he actually gets it, I retorted. He understands my ambitions, my frustrations. He knew me when I was somebody, before I became just a wife and mother stuck in this tiny apartment. The words hung in the air between us like poison. I saw Jasper absorb the blow, watched him process the implication that our life together, our marriage, our daughter, our home, was somehow less than what I deserved. My phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't hesitate to check it. You sound upset. Want to meet for coffee tomorrow? I hate hearing you so stressed. Without thinking, I typed back, yes. I need to get out of here. When I looked up, Jasper was watching me with those patient, wounded eyes that made me feel simultaneously guilty and defiant. You just made plans with him, he said. It wasn't a question. I made plans to have coffee with a friend who actually cares about my well-being, while lying to your husband about where you'll be. I opened my mouth to deny it, then realized he was right. I had been planning to tell him I was working late or meeting my sister Ria. The automatic deception scared me almost as much as it thrilled me. I shouldn't have to lie, I said instead, deflecting. I should be able to have coffee with a friend without getting the third degree from my insecure husband. Jasper stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his expression. The hurt was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more determined. You're right, he said finally. You shouldn't have to lie. A wife should be able to tell her husband the truth. He turned and walked toward our bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the dining room with my phone still clutched in my hand. I should have felt victorious. I'd won the argument, defended my right to maintain my friendship with Dorian. So why did I feel so hollow? My phone buzzed one more time. Sweet dreams, beautiful. Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to make you happy again. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to tell Dorian that this was getting too complicated, that maybe we needed some boundaries. But a larger part of me craved the attention, the validation, the feeling of being desired and understood. I typed back, "Can't wait to see you." From the bedroom, I heard the quiet sound of Jasper's laptop opening. He was probably working late again, burying himself in code and systems the way he always did when we fought. It used to bother me, but now I felt almost relieved. At least he wasn't asking more questions I didn't want to answer. I finished cleaning the kitchen, my mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's coffee date with Dorian. What would I wear? What would we talk about? The anticipation felt dangerous and intoxicating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering what it would feel like to jump. When I finally went to bed, Jasper was still awake, the blue glow of his laptop screen casting shadows across his face. He didn't look up when I entered the room, didn't acknowledge me as I got ready for bed. The silence felt heavy and loaded, like the air before a storm. As I lay in the darkness, my phone charging on the nightstand, I wondered if Jasper was right about the emotional affair. But even if he was, did it really matter? Dorian made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. Was that really so wrong? The last thing I remembered before falling asleep was the soft sound of Jasper closing his laptop and the rustle of papers being shuffled in the darkness. The downtown cafe buzzed with the usual Tuesday afternoon crowd. Business people grabbing quick coffees, students hunched over laptops, and me sitting across from Dorian Vale, feeling more alive than I had in months. You look beautiful today, Dorian said, his green eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "That blue dress brings out your eyes." I felt heat bloom in my cheeks. When was the last time Jasper had complimented my appearance? I couldn't remember. "Thank you," I murmured, tucking a strand of dark hair behind my ear. "It's nice to be seen, you know. Really seen." Dorian leaned forward, his elbows on the small round table between us. At 33, he'd maintained the lean, athletic build I remembered from college, and his dark hair still fell across his forehead in that boyish way that had once made my heart race. "Tell me what's going on at home," he said softly. "You sounded upset yesterday." I glanced around the cafe, suddenly paranoid that someone might overhear us, but the ambient noise provided perfect cover for our intimate conversation. "It's Jasper," I began, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup for warmth. "He's become so controlling lately, questioning who I talk to, monitoring my phone calls, making me feel guilty for having friendships outside our marriage." Dorian's expression darkened. "That's not healthy, Mel. You're an independent woman with every right to maintain your own relationships." The validation felt like sunlight after weeks of rain. "Exactly, but he doesn't see it that way. He thinks—" I paused, wondering how much to reveal. "He thinks there's something inappropriate about our friendship." "Is there?" Dorian asked quietly, his eyes searching mine. The question hung between us like a challenge. I knew the honest answer. Yes, there was something inappropriate about the way my pulse quickened when he texted, about the way I found excuses to meet him, about the way I compared every interaction with my husband to the easy intimacy I shared with Dorian. But honesty felt too dangerous. "Of course not," I said, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "We're friends. We have history. Just because Jasper is insecure doesn't mean we're doing anything wrong." Dorian nodded, but something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. "I care about you, Mel," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I always have. Seeing you unhappy in your marriage, it kills me." His fingers were warm against my skin, and I didn't pull away even though I knew I should. The touch felt electric, forbidden, intoxicating. "I know," I whispered, "and I'm grateful. You're the only person who really understands me anymore." "What do you want?" he asked suddenly, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of my hand. "If you could have anything, what would make you happy?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want? The life I'd had in college, when I was young and free and full of possibilities. The career I'd abandoned when Ella was born. Or something else entirely. Something that involved the man sitting across from me, looking at me like I was the most important person in the world. "I want to feel appreciated," I said finally. "I want someone to see me as more than just a wife and mother. I want to matter." "You matter to me," Dorian said intensely. "You always have." My phone buzzed against the table. Jasper's name appeared on the screen. "How's work going? Will you be home for dinner?" The intrusion of reality felt jarring. I quickly typed back, "Busy day. Might be late. Don't wait up." "Work?" Dorian asked with a knowing smile. "It's easier than explaining," I said, sliding the phone back into my purse. He wouldn't understand. "Understand what? That you need adult conversation and emotional support?" He'd make it into something it's not. But even as I said the words, I wondered if Jasper's suspicions were more accurate than I wanted to admit. The way Dorian looked at me, the way I dressed up for these coffee dates, the way my heart raced when I saw his name on my phone, it all felt dangerously close to the beginning of something that could destroy my marriage. "Maybe we should be more careful," I said suddenly, pulling my hand back from his touch. "If Jasper found out about these meetings, what would happen?" Dorian challenged. "Would he forbid you from seeing me? Control who you're allowed to spend time with?" The thought of Jasper issuing ultimatums made my defiance flare. "He couldn't stop me. I'm not his property." "Exactly. You're a grown woman who deserves to have meaningful friendships. Don't let his insecurity rob you of that." We talked for another hour, about work and dreams and the disappointments of adult life. Dorian told me about his job at the marketing firm, his recent promotion, his plans to travel to Europe next year. His life sounded exciting, full of possibilities, so different from my routine of office work and domestic responsibilities. "You should come with me," he said suddenly as we prepared to leave. "To Europe, I mean. Take a vacation from all this stress." I laughed, but the suggestion sent a thrill through me. I can't just abandon my family for a European vacation. "Why not? When's the last time you did something just for yourself?" I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. Every decision I made revolved around Ella's needs, or Jasper's schedule, or the household budget. When had I stopped being Meliora and become just somebody's wife and mother? As we walked out of the cafe together, Dorian suddenly stopped and pulled out his phone. "Let me get a picture," he said. "You look so happy today." Before I could protest, he'd wrapped his arm around my shoulders and snapped a selfie of us both laughing. The casual intimacy of the gesture, his arm around me, our heads close together, felt both natural and terrifying. "Send that to me," I said impulsively. "Already done." We parted ways in the parking lot, with a hug that lasted just a beat too long. As I drove home, I felt the familiar mixture of euphoria and guilt that followed every meeting with Dorian. He made me feel like myself again, the confident, interesting woman I'd been before marriage and motherhood dulled my edges. But as I pulled into my apartment complex, reality crashed back down. Jasper's car was already in our assigned spot, which meant he'd gotten home early. I'd told him I was working late, but it was barely 6 o'clock. I sat in my car for a moment, crafting my story. I'd gotten caught up in a project and lost track of time. Then I'd grabbed a quick coffee before heading home. Simple, believable, mostly true. When I walked into the apartment, Jasper was in the kitchen starting dinner, while Ella worked on homework at the dining table. "You're home early," he observed, not looking up from the cutting board. "Meeting got cancelled," I said smoothly. "Figured I'd come home and spend time with my family." He nodded, but something in his posture suggested he didn't quite believe me. Had someone seen Dorian and me together? Did I smell like his cologne? Was there some other tell I hadn't considered? My phone buzzed. Without thinking, I checked it. "Thanks for today. You're amazing. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I quickly deleted the message, but when I looked up, Jasper was watching me with that familiar expression of patient suspicion. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just work stuff." But as I helped Ella with her math homework, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath my feet was shifting. Each lie felt easier to tell, but harder to live with. Each secret meeting with Dorian pulled me further away from my marriage, even as it made me feel more like myself. That night, as Jasper and I lay in bed, he reached for me with the tentative touch of a husband trying to reconnect with his wife. But all I could think about was Dorian's hand on mine, the way he looked at me like I was fascinating and desirable instead of just familiar. I let Jasper hold me, but my mind was already planning the next coffee date, the next stolen hour of feeling appreciated and understood. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, just maintaining a friendship that happened to fill needs my marriage couldn't meet. But deep down, I knew I was lying to everyone, including myself. "I thought it would be nice if Dorian joined us tonight," I announced as we pulled into Jasper's parents' driveway, watching my husband's knuckles whiten on the steering wheel. "You what?" Jasper's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. "He's practically family," I continued breezily, checking my lipstick in the visor mirror. "Your parents have met him before and Ella adores him. It'll be fun." In the back seat, Ella bounced excitedly. "Uncle Dorian is coming. Is he going to bring me another book?" "See?" I said triumphantly. "Even your daughter is happy about it." Jasper turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the car. "Meliora, this is my parents' house. You can't just invite your friend to family dinner without discussing it with me first." Why not? Are you ashamed of me having friends? That's not the point, and you know it. But I was already getting out of the car, smoothing down my new red dress, the one I'd bought specifically because Dorian had mentioned how good I looked in red. I'd spent an hour on my makeup and hair, telling myself it was just because I wanted to look nice for family dinner. Jasper's parents, Harold and Joanna, lived in a modest 2-story house in the suburbs, the kind of place where family photos covered every surface and the smell of home cooking always lingered in the air. Joanna answered the door with her usual warm smile, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes when she saw me. "Meliora, dear, you look lovely," she said, embracing me with the kind of hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "Jasper, sweetheart, come give your mother a kiss." "Mum, Dad," Jasper said as his father appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk about something before dinner." "Oh, that reminds me," I interrupted brightly. "I hope you don't mind, but I invited Dorian to join us tonight. He should be here any minute." The silence that followed was deafening. Harold and Joanna exchanged a look that spoke volumes, while Jasper closed his eyes as if praying for patience. "Dorian?" Joanna repeated carefully. "Your friend from college?" "My best friend," I corrected, enjoying the way the words made Jasper flinch. I thought it would be nice for him to spend time with the family. He's been such a support to me lately. The doorbell rang before anyone could respond. I practically skipped to answer it, leaving my husband and his parents standing in awkward silence behind me. Dorian stood on the porch, looking devastatingly handsome, in a navy blazer and dark jeans, holding a bottle of wine and wearing that charming smile that had first captured my attention 15 years ago. "Mel?" he said warmly, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You look absolutely stunning." I felt heat bloom across my skin at the compliment, acutely aware of how long it had been since Jasper had said anything similar. "Come in," I said, taking his arm and leading him into the living room where my family waited like a firing squad. "Mr. and Mrs. Crane," Dorian said smoothly, extending his hand to Harold. "Thank you so much for having me. I brought a bottle of that Pinot Noir you mentioned enjoying last time we met." I watched Joanna's eyebrows rise slightly. There had been no previous meeting where wine preferences were discussed, but Dorian's confident delivery made the lie sound completely believable. "How thoughtful," Harold said diplomatically, though his handshake seemed less than enthusiastic. Dinner was an exercise in barely concealed tension. I positioned myself between Dorian and Ella, directly across from Jasper, who spent the entire meal staring at his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. "So, Dorian," Joanna said with false brightness as she passed the roast, "Meliora tells us you work in marketing." "That's right," he replied, flashing that megawatt smile. "Just got promoted to senior account manager, actually. It's exciting work. Lots of travel, creative projects, working with interesting clients." I felt a surge of pride, as if his success reflected well on me somehow. "Dorian's always been incredibly ambitious," I said, reaching over to squeeze his arm. "Even in college, he had such big dreams. Unlike some of us," I added with a pointed look at Jasper, "who are content to stay in the same job, in the same place, doing the same things year after year." The barb hit its mark. Jasper's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Harold cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Joanna's lips pressed into a thin line. "Stability has its merits," Harold said carefully. "Jasper's built a good life for his family." "Of course he has," I said with a laugh that sounded brittle even to my own ears. "But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have a partner who still had dreams, you know? Someone who wanted to explore the world instead of hiding behind a computer screen." "Mum," Ella said quietly, her small voice cutting through the tension, "Daddy's not hiding." The innocence in her tone made my chest tight with guilt, but I pushed the feeling aside. "Of course not, sweetheart. Mummy's just talking about grown-up things." Dorian jumped into the silence. "You know, Meliora was always the most adventurous person in our friend group. Remember that time in college when you convinced everyone to drive to the coast at midnight just to watch the sunrise. His eyes sparkled with shared memory, and I felt myself leaning toward him unconsciously. "That was your idea," I protested with a laugh. "Was it? I remember you being the one who said life was too short to waste sleeping when we could be making memories." The intimate tone of our exchange created a bubble around us, as if the rest of the family had ceased to exist. I was dimly aware of the uncomfortable silence from the others, but Dorian's attention felt like sunlight, warm and intoxicating. "You two certainly seem to have a lot of shared history," Joanna observed, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. 20 years of friendship," I said proudly. "Dorian knows me better than almost anyone." "Better than your husband?" The question came from Harold, and his usually gentle tone had turned sharp. I felt heat creep up my neck. "Different. He knows me differently." "How so?" Jasper spoke for the first time since we'd sat down, his voice dangerously quiet. I looked across the table at my husband, really looked at him, and saw something that made my stomach clench. It wasn't anger or jealousy. It was disappointment so profound it seemed to radiate from his very bones. "He knew me when I was young and free," I said defensively, "before I got bogged down in domestic responsibilities and lost sight of who I really am." The words hung in the air like a slap. Ella's fork clattered against her plate, and I realized, too late, how my statement must have sounded to her, like her very existence was a burden I resented. "Meliora," Dorian said quietly, his hand finding mine on the table. "Maybe we should—" "Should what?" I snapped, suddenly feeling cornered by their collective stares. "Should pretend that marriage and motherhood haven't changed me. Should act like I don't sometimes miss the person I used to be." Jasper stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Ella, sweetheart, why don't you go play in Grandpa's study for a few minutes? The grown-ups need to talk." Our daughter looked between us with those two wise eyes, then nodded solemnly and slipped away from the table. The sound of her footsteps fading down the hallway left us in charged silence. "I think," Jasper said carefully, "that it's time for some honesty." My heart began to race. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he walked to the front door and returned with a manila envelope I hadn't noticed him carrying in. He set it on the table between us like a challenge. "What's that?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. "Documentation," Jasper said simply. "Phone records, credit card statements, a few other things." The blood drained from my face. "You've been spying on me." "I've been paying attention to my wife," he corrected, something I probably should have done sooner. Dorian shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Look, maybe I should go—" "No," Jasper said firmly. "Stay. Since you're such an important part of my wife's life, you should hear this too." He opened the envelope and spread several papers across the table. Even upside down, I could see phone logs, bank statements, and what looked like printed screenshots. 347 text messages in the past month, Jasper read aloud. 17 coffee dates that were charged to our joint credit card while you told me you were working late. And this particularly interesting conversation from last Tuesday. He held up a screenshot that made my blood turn to ice. It was a text exchange between Dorian and me, including the message where he'd called me beautiful and my response about deserving better than what I was getting at home. "How did you—" I started. "Cloud backup," Jasper said simply. "Amazing what you can learn when you actually pay attention to technology instead of just using it to lie to your family." The room spun around me. Everything I'd thought was private, every secret moment I'd shared with Dorian, had been documented and preserved like evidence in a criminal case. "This is a violation of my privacy," I said, grasping for moral high ground. "This is a marriage," Joanna said sharply, speaking up for the first time since the confrontation began. "And you've been making a mockery of it." "Mom," Jasper warned, but his mother was just getting started. "No, I'm going to say this," she continued, her 64 years of accumulated wisdom blazing in her eyes. I've watched you manipulate my son for months, making him doubt his own instincts, making him feel like he was crazy for being concerned about your behavior. And now you have the audacity to bring your affair partner to our family dinner. It's not an affair, I protested, even as the words sounded hollow. What would you call it? Harold asked quietly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been having a relationship with another man while married to our son. I looked around the table at their faces, Jasper's quiet devastation, his parents' disappointed anger, even Dorian's obvious discomfort with being caught in the middle of a family crisis. I need some air, I said, standing up so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. But as I reached the front door, I heard Jasper's voice behind me, calm and final. Take all the time you need, Meliora. When you're ready to come home, we'll finish this conversation, but understand, things are going to change. I fled into the night, my heart pounding and my carefully constructed world crumbling around me. For the first time since this all began, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to admit that Jasper might have been right all along.